listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm SavageMick.
I'm Shane.
I'm Liam.
And I'm Owen.
And we are here this week to take a listener question. We reached out before we started recording today to find out what you guys were thinking of, you folks, I should say. And a really interesting question came back. They're all interesting questions, but this one really tickled my fancy, and I've bullied the rest of the party into giving me a little bit of space for this one. We're going to address a question that came to us from Discord regular, Miyagi Yoda. And Miyagi Yoda's been with us almost since the start of our adventure on Discord, so it's great to get this question off you. And she, Miyagi, came to us with this one. I'm going to read it out before we start. I've been reading Gun and Slinger. In the game, the weapon is sentient and a player. The conceit is that your weapon and the wielder are more together. Set out into a dead planet mutated by a god's forgotten child, and you hunt strange bounties, investigate the world, and unlock hidden powers. During play, they seek to learn the nature of what's hunting the slinger, figure out why the gun is sentient, and discover how the world died. And the variations are Sword and Bearer, Mech Ex-Pilot, and The Demon. The question: how easy is it to slot sentient equipment into existing, more popular systems? Is it best as an NPC, or as a player, or as the World of Darkness wraith trick of another player being your capital S shadow? Can this be fulfilling for more than a one-shot? Is this a viable way to include someone at the table who may be reluctant to join or hesitant to graduate past spectator, or that pesky kid who hangs about and you're afraid will ruin your adult game? So, the question is about sentient weapons or sentient equipment and where we can slot them into our games. What do we think, folks?
Well, my horribly overanalytical mind automatically breaks this down into what level are you presenting this sentient item at? And I think we've identified three main ones. One where it's a non-party NPC, as in just something in the world. One where it's a party NPC, as in, you know, the fighter gets the magic sword that talks, puts it in scabbard, and it just, you know, the NPC, the GM puts in some wisecracking dialogue whenever he pulls it out. Or where it is actually a player character being run by a human at the table. So I feel like we could probably start outwards and work way in, or do people have another take on it?
Yeah, those are three kind of operational categories I'd fit them into, but I'd be curious if anyone has another take on it before we get down to the meat of it.
I think those are the broad strokes.
Yeah. You kind of get into each one of them in turn and talk about what they mean.
The thing I'd really want to preface with all of this stuff, and I don't know, maybe it should be slotted in later, or maybe we can talk about it now. I think the biggest thing you have to watch out for when you're bringing in any of these kind of things, either be it a player who is an item, or be it an item that's taking control of someone, is taking away player agency is very tricky, because it can lead to a lot of bad feelings. And be that the player who has a gun sitting in a holster and they can't do anything because the gunslinger won't do it with them, or be that the player who is there and then the headband takes them over at night and they go out and murder somebody. It's tricky. So just bear in mind that players often dislike... Now, you can get great story out of it, but players often dislike that agency being taken away from them. So I think it needs to be treaded on very lightly.
That's definitely, I think that is the core of the discussion about giving this to a player, and that's kind of towards the end of Miyagi Yoda's question. So let's work through the least difficult tiers of this first. When we encounter a sentient object or a sentient weapon, and it's kind of purely in the hands of the GM or the DM, I think that's the thing we're probably most comfortable with.
Probably,
we sort of
I mean,
your
a lot of systems even integrate that into the rules. Like they have rules for sentient items and what happens, and in terms of who's in charge at any given time. You know, it might compel you to do something. It might have an ego score, and you roll your stats versus its ego score to see if it gets to take control of you. Some games even embrace it as a full-fledged part of the rules.
Quite often a cursed item might fall into this category, that there's a compulsion there to act as it dictates. The sentient ship is another kind of classic.
You kind of need to. It needs to either be very powerful, or you need to have gotten trapped by it somehow, either like a demonic pact or a cursed item or something that you're stuck with. Because if it's just a lame-o +1 sword and you've got plenty of other ones that are just as good, why would you go for the one that might randomly take you over and start killing everybody?
Yeah. I feel like an awful lot of these things are cursed just to be cursed, as opposed to having player buy-in as a consideration. Like if you're tempting the One Ring didn't take people over, it tempted them. And I think that's why it's still a interesting item, you know.
I hadn't thought of that, but it's a very good example of the GM side sentient item, isn't it? I mean, its sentience is debatable, but its effect in the world, and it's, as you say, the corruption, the temptation, the possibility of great power, or the hidden price for using it in the first place, all sort of tied into its malevolent will that the player comes to understand.
A lot of the good ones have to start off with the consequences only really become apparent later on. You know, that maybe you make a roll, and the first roll, maybe you build up some like corruption points or something like that, and it's not a big deal, but you keep using it and it gets worse and worse and worse. And like that with the Lord of the Rings, where the more people are exposed to the ring, the crazier they get. It's not until you start going later on that it becomes a problem. You keep using it.
Well, this is the Faustian Pact, of course. Yeah, you're too far in. You're going to keep going. Oh, it's the observation that's always made about the One Ring, is that it takes whatever it can find in its bearer and twists it, which is why so many of the wisest characters that encounter are like, no, you hold on to that. I'm cool. I'm not. You know what? All my magic item slots are full.
Yeah.
You just carry on there on your way to Mount Doom. I'm sure that'll work out for you.
I think one of the biggest problems that I've had with this kind of magic item is, so where there's this battle of wills going on, how do you represent that and how do you play that out? Like traditionally, you know, you might pass notes to your player, or you might just talk to them, or maybe pull them aside and have a little side discussion. Look, this is what the sword wants, or this is what the thing wants. Maybe what you do. I think that we have one opportunity now with so much more online play, in that most of your VTTs have a system where you can whisper from player to the GM. So you can be going along, and I'll be talking away to the rest of the party, send a whisper saying, you know, as the party's negotiating openly with this trader, and suddenly the sword's going, kill him. And maybe the player doesn't act on it, but they're probably getting unsettled by the fact that the sword is whispering to them, literally whispering to them, that they need to kill this NPC.
Okay, so we've slid kind of almost instantly into sentient artifact or object or weapon that is owned or held or attached to a player character at the table, and how you deal with that. Which is, it's kind of the singing sword, or some of the other things we've talked about being classic examples. Venom from the comic books.
Very good choice.
Elric's sword. I've forgotten the name of Elric's sword now. Stormbringer being another great. And I don't recall the Stormbringer ever directly talk to Elric, but it always made its intentions clear.
It has one line at the very end of the thing, and spoiler alert, it is after bad things have already happened. So it saves its big entrance speech for maximum impact.
Scarr, do you want to tell us what it was? What that line was?
No, spoilers. Read the Elric books. They're pretty good. They're old school as hell, but
they're pretty damn good.
They're
Hida.
Last time I did the sentient item in an RPG, it was in Deathwatch. And I had one of the players had his artifact heavy bolter had a machine spirit that sent messages.
Very good.
And it was a really old heavy bolter, and it was like, yep, this is what you do in this situation. So it was a way for me to advise one of the less experienced players in the 40k universe about what to do. So he would get messages from his heavy bolter would tell him to do things like, yep, that's a Xenos, you want to shoot that. Or it was stuff like, okay, this guy's that's warp corruption, you want to use me right now. And it was basically, he would give him advice about what to do. I would basically pass little notes to the player, and it literally would appear in his readout like a text message from his gun. He didn't know it was coming from his gun, because, they're not meant to be that talkative, and it's heresy. So the gun would occasionally just tell him to give him information. That's what that is.
A lot of that advice sounded pretty similar, to be honest.
A lot of it did, but he's a heavy bolter. Like, he's a pretty smart heavy bolter, but he's a heavy bolter. His job is not to... He's not one for extemporaneous thought. It's like, yeah, you want to kill that now. I
love that you've got in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, Clippy the paperclip is pointing out the heretic to shoot.
Yeah.
Hey, that looks like a heretic.
He used to give a number at the end.
That looks like
there was a number at the end of every message, and he was trying to figure out what the number meant, and eventually figured out that was how many bolter shells he needed to use.
Wild.
So that's the last time I did it, and it was a way to effectively husband a player through, because everyone else in the game had played a bit of 40k, and I wanted to kind of baby that player through it a little bit. So I said, this is his edge to keep him up with everybody else who kind of knows the setting a lot more.
This is amazing. It's kind of baked into some of the traditional role-playing classes as well. If you look at familiars and some of the warlock pacts, I believe, have a kind of a similar aspect to it, that they end up treating these familiars or animal companions are basically bits of equipment that have the potential for some personality. Now, we did an episode on familiars and things like that fairly recently, so you can go back and listen to some of that. But these are places where the GM can give a nudge, drop a story hint, as you say, guide a player through some of the nuances of shooting heretics. Which I think that's wild. That's a great idea, by the way. Hats off, Owen. And that's largely where we'd kind of leave things. But Gun and Slinger is the game that Miyagi Oda brought up, and that's kind of where things get a bit weird. Because now we're talking about giving a player the role of one of these sentient weapons or objects of power. And how do we handle that? Now, Miyagi Oda was asking, is this a good way to introduce someone to role-playing if they're a little bit reluctant, they want the same kind of responsibility? Gun and Slinger, the game designed by Nevin Holmes, is a kind of a post-magic, slightly sort of sci-fi apocalyptic western with weird magic. I'm going to use the word paracausal here because it's kind of seeping into the way we talk about magic in future or tech settings, and that's for 2 players. So that's
Dark
kind of
Terror-y?
Very much, yeah. The Dark Tower of Stephen King.
It's just space magic. It's just magic in space.
It's exactly that.
But it's just magic in space. It's great, but it's just magic in space.
It's if you're not hard sci-fi, you're probably using something paracausal. But if it's kind of dressed up in mysticism, then it's definitely paracausal.
Yeah.
So, right. So
it's just cause doesn't follow effect. But anyway, it's
pretty much, yeah. Magic. So we have a paracausal entity, the gun, that's partnered with the slinger, and they're both exploring this weird magical wasteland and trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, you very specifically need 2 players for this RPG. So you have one player playing the slinger, and the slinger is sort of doing their thing with a bunch of basically they have a mutation, and they're sort of trying to balance their mutation versus their the things that make the mutation go away, like doing good deeds. So it's perfect for that sort of edgy, I don't want to be a hero, but it helps me retain my humanity thing. And then the gun is sort of, it has limited movement. It can sort of like hop out of people's holsters. But it also has a lot of abilities to deal with magic. So the gunslinger is doing all the mutation stuff, and the gun sort of is the magic sniffer dog. So they both have defined roles and little abilities, so, they're balanced in that way.
So the system's built for it. But we may be exploring this in terms of other systems that might feature sentient equipment and weapons, but don't necessarily cater. Now, this is where I think things get really interesting. What can we do as players and GMs to, explore this, to kind of facilitate it? Can we make it work? Is it a lost cause? Do you need to have a really specific system? And crucially, is this, as Miyagi Oda suggests, something you could kind of throw to a new or kind of cautious player? Or, and I'm going to show my hand here a little, is this something you probably need a few seasons under your belt to really have a good run at? What do people think?
If someone's playing a magic weapon and they're not taking over the other player, which I wouldn't advise, it's unless both the players are very into it. At that point, probably not a good solution.
Everybody's got their thing.
Everyone's got their thing, but my take would be it's not for a newer player, because they actually won't learn a lot about agency in some ways, because they're a weapon and they're generally unless the weapon hops out and runs around on its own doing its own thing, and at that point you could be playing something a bit different. You could be playing somebody's... if you wanted a less thing investment, you could just play somebody's familiar, and at least then you have legs. Playing somebody's weapon is a stylistic choice that a newish player might be like, oh, what can I do? Can I say something? And it's like, okay, can the sword actually talk? And is the sword talking, acceptable? Are people going to freak out that the sword is talking to them? At which point, for a new player, you're better off them just being a regular character. For a more experienced player, if someone came to me and said, I want to be this person's magic sword, and I'd be like, okay, why? That'd be my first question. Is I want the first time somebody asks me I want to play something different, my question is, sure, but why? Just what do you want to actually achieve with this?
Yeah, it's not accusatory. It's
just
trying to interrogate what's the fantasy that you're trying to get out of this game.
So I can understand whether you'll get out of it what I think you'll get out of it, rather than you'll go, it'll be a laugh playing a sword, and then it won't be a laugh.
No. Where it's you're the sword, a character like that, the sword probably isn't negotiating with everybody. If the sword's negotiating with everybody, you shouldn't be playing a sword. Unless you think it'll be a lull.
A diplomat's sword in the hand of a barbarian.
For a very specific 3-player game, I can see it working, but I think the problem for me is where most of the games are, it's okay, this guy playing the sword says, okay, that visitor is shady, I think we should go talk to him. And then the person playing the sword wielder is like, nah, it's got a pub. What do you do?
Well,
you have that problem normally with a party anyway, but it's exacerbated by the fact that ultimately you can always split the party. You can't split the party if it's a sword with no legs, as Owen said, no legs. What do you do?
The One Ring did manage to find its way into the hands of the people it felt it needed to be in the hands of, depending. There'll be some GM fiat here, perhaps.
But the One Ring's a plot device.
Fair.
The thing is, if you're much better, if someone was like, I want to play their magic sword, I would be like, isn't it better for you to play your own character, and then I'll also let you play the magic sword? And that way, the fact that because if you're doing this for the lulz, because this would be really funny when I'm the sword trying to talk everyone down when he's a barbarian, I'm like, yes, that will be really funny for 1 or 2 sessions, or if it happens once every so often. When it's your full contribution to the game every week, I think it will not be that engaging. I think it's less engaging after a while. I prefer to be like, okay, you can also play as magic sword and you can give him advice.
Yeah, or even just spin it a bit and go, okay, right, you're not playing a magic sword, you're playing a spirit that's possessing a magic sword. So more like the kind of the paladin thing of where the sword is inhabited by a spirit. And then at least maybe you'd be able to, like temporarily leave the sword and go stare through a wall or do whatever, investigative ghosty stuff you want to do. At least then you're having a few more feathers in the bow rather than just you're sitting in a scabbard and that's it.
Yeah, if you're going full anime, you could be some kind of familiar that turns into a sword.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Like
lots
that.
of options there. So one of the things I'd say about this is that, okay, the restrictions around it can be quite tight. As you say, movement, which we generally don't really think about, but it becomes hugely important. You can't go anywhere without the consent or the facilitation of somebody else. And that's why it's really a conversation, not just between you and a GM. You've got to get another player, presumably the player you're working with, and say, listen, if we're going to do this, we've got to have a kind of a Butch and Sundance, or we have to have what was the name of that not Tom Cruise, the other one, Tom Hanks movie, where he had a canine dog. He was a police detective.
Turner and Hooch?
Turner and Hooch, a classic. You're treating what you're doing in the game as a sort of a buddy movie riff, where one of the buddies is strapped to the other. Gene Wilder and damn it, I can't remember anyone's name today. They played a blind guy,
Richard Pryor?
deaf guy. Richard Pryor.
Hear them weevil, see no weevil.
Blind guy and a deaf guy said, who had to work together
Because they
to
were
get
handcuffed
through.
together, wasn't it?
They were both accused of a crime committed by people who look very like them.
Point is, you're now in a duet. You cannot go out on the floor and dance on your own. You're going to have to be in simpatico with another player, and you're going to have to make compromises with that player. And quite often when we role play, we tend to make compromises with our GM, going back and forth about what's good for the game, what's good for me, what do I want to achieve. But now you've got to do that with another player. So this is why I think it's so important that if you're going to do this, and I think you can do this with the restrictions, and I'll go out on a limb here and say you can probably do this for an entire campaign if you think about it, but you have to be in lockstep with another player, and you both have to be on board with this, because really you're making up a part you're not really that interesting. Oh, a talking sword. Oh, a barbarian. But together, you've got the potential to make something truly iconic, something that everybody else at the table will remember forever. But yeah, it's not just talk to your GM or talk to your players. You actually have to start really planning with another player in a way that you normally wouldn't do. And again, there's going to be compromises, and we don't generally have to make too many compromises with our fellow players. But this is one of those situations where I suspect you're probably going to have to.
Yeah, if you have a duet or like a co-conspirator that's willing to not only work with this concept, but also has the ability to inject the spice, the buddy cop, two different eggs style. Because I think that's also going to be another vital part of it. Is that if it's a sword who believes in smiting evil and doing lawful good things with a paladin who's lawful good and believes in smiting evil, I don't think you're going to get a tremendously amazing time, or it's going to be all that interesting. But if you have just enough tension where, they have slightly different goals and they're better off working together, but they just have just enough stuff to add spice to the proceedings, I think that's when you're going to get the most. And also the rest of the party then has to be up for listening to your back and forth shtick, and it has to generally be, elevating for the table. So there is that to consider.
So an interesting one is, if you want a great example of a sentient weapon, check out Brandon Sanderson's Warbreaker book. One of the characters in it is Nightblood, who is a sentient sword, which they created. And the way you create a magic item in that world is you put effectively souls into it and give it a command. And then it tries to achieve that command. So if you touch a piece of cloth and put some souls into it and say, wrap him, the cloth will wrap around the person you're doing it. So they created this sword by putting a massive amount of souls into it. And we give it a command. Okay, destroy evil. So the sword's thing is destroying evil. So when somebody picks it up, they hear a voice in their head going, hello, would you like to destroy some evil today? And it's a really cool, really funky weapon that doesn't know what evil is, but asks people, is that evil? Should we destroy that evil? It's described as sentient but not sapient. it doesn't have a human context for its intelligence. So it's basically like sort of childlike, but also incredibly dangerous. Because it doesn't fully understand what's going on. And that's a role-playing opportunity for players to kind of bounce back and forth with a thing, which could be quite interesting. But again, I think it's limited interest. I think you do it a little bit every session, and not a huge amount every session.
If you wanted to go whole hog on this, and you're looking for an example, and you've got more than 2 players, I'd encourage you to check out the 2000 AD comic strip, Rogue Trooper, which has a brilliant conceit where it's a squad of 4 genetically engineered warriors who are dropped into a kill zone in some future war. They're blue, by the way, if that makes any difference. 3 of the 4 get wiped out, and the last member of the squad survives and takes their biochips, cuts them out of their skulls, and slots them into the conveniently present slots on each of his helmet, his backpack, and his rifle. And his 4 squad mates take up the sentient sort of control systems of this sensor package on his helmet, this sort of item storage and delivery system on his backpack, and of course his gun, which is gun and does shoots, much like the bolter you described at the start of the episode. And there's been a lot of writers on Rogue Trooper, but some of the early 2000s stuff gave these items a great deal of personality, some autonomy, but a trigger-happy gun, a sort of father figure helmet, and a scrounging quartermaster backpack who's always looking to conserve items, even in the face of we need another grenade. Just give me another grenade. Or we might need the grenades later. I don't know if I should give you a grenade now. And all of this taking place with only 1 character with legs and the ability to choose where they were going. But obviously a great deal of conceit on the writer's part. But I feel there's a model there that could be explored, and no end of stories that might see the 4 torn apart and brought back together in interesting ways.
I mean, it can work, because, in general, in a party, there is often one person who's deciding where they're going anyway. Like, parties generally have a shot caller who says, okay, well, what do we think? All right, well, nobody objects. Okay, well, let's go talk to that Vizier then. Off we go. So, it's not that far a stretch to have a party which literally is being directed by one player.
I just wanted to bring attention to the ultimate version of this, where all of the players are playing the items, and and all of the wielders of items are NPCs. That's an interesting thing that's come out. I believe there's at least one game that's come out called Wield, which is about playing a series of sentient items. And I believe show friend Donna has actually put a few episodes of himself running this game with 2 folks from the Gauntlet RPG community, where they each take turns playing as their special item and the current rube who is attempting to use the item for various things, and then they back and forth as the characters switch out. So that's an interesting one you might want to look up. There's also an interesting one where there's a game called Transit, where you play not as the Star Trek style crew of a spaceship, but you play the AIs of the ship themselves, and you're sort of trying to balance doing the mission with keeping your crew in line and trying to get around the fact that the crew have their own business going on. So it becomes a thing where this fleet, the party is essentially a fleet of spaceships who have to negotiate with their own crews to get things done. So I thought that was interesting. As the ultimate expression of this idea, it struck out to me as one worth thinking about.
I would also say that mechanically, if you're doing this in a game like D&D or Pathfinder or something else, this is a pain in the ass to do. Because what do you do in that? What does that player do? Do they also get to fight in their turns? Do they just, does the person wielding them just get a bonus? Or is it literally just, I do nothing during combat, he's swinging my sword, Like, what do you do? Does a player fight twice? Like the sword fights and then the player fights?
You can do it, to give the sword hit points, and it's a level 3 sorcerer, off you go, grand.
Yeah.
You can do it, but it's work.
It's work. It's not simple to, if you're porting this in, as how do you handle this? Does this get its own fight? Does
go make a cup of tea.
What does it do? Yeah, some people want that.
I mean, for the game, it could work. It could be we get the group together. All right, I'm going to stick on dinner while you guys do this combat.
Yeah.
So to address that directly, I'd say there are some people who would like to stay involved with D&D, but don't necessarily grox on the mechanics the way that a lot of us do, especially in its certainly 4th ed and 3.5, and even 5th ed can be quite mechanically involved. If they're an experienced role player, I think they can get a lot out of this and leave the grid-based stuff to the rest of the party. That might involve stepping away to take care of something else, or just devoting their energies to coming up with new and even more ridiculous battle cries every round of combat. or shot calling in the middle of combat.
I think the main thing is that it's not necessarily that you want to make sure that you have some mechanic, but that there's also an option of mechanics too. I've had a few thoughts on this myself. I feel like what you would want would be a system where most of the time the player has a choice of 2 to 3 good actions, and then if they want to do something special, the thing. So rather than let them attack, say that they can give a d6 to the attack roll of the person wielding them, or they could choose to give a d4 to someone else through magic, or that they can give temporary hit points, and then as they level up, kind of feed in other spell-like abilities or something. But it is a pain in the ass.
That's just being a bard, but you're a bard that's an item.
Yeah. You would probably end up stealing a lot of support mechanics from different things, and that sort of relies that you have a strong...
pure support class is an interesting way of doing it. So there's potentially, with a lot of work and a great deal of sort of consulting back and forth across the party, there's a way to make it work in the world's most popular role-playing game. It's not the best fit. I mean, we're looking at bespoke systems for a reason here, because they're written around the idea, and I think it's a powerful and interesting idea. If you've got a system that supports it, you can probably get a lot of play out of it. If you don't have a system that supports it, it might be something to consider as a way to change characters for a couple of months, or maybe your character is killed and finds themselves in the sword of a companion of the party, and the quest becomes how to get you back into a body, and in the meantime you get to do this stuff. Who knows? There's lots of possibilities there, but I think perhaps we're going to have to sheathe our weapons of opinion and words for now, placate our machine spirits, and wrap up on this particular topic. Although it is definitely something we could probably plough on for another while over. So, anyone else have a final thought before we finish up? Okay, silent swords finally.
Well, just to reiterate again, just really think out what you plan on doing with this stuff, because, like I say, agency is a huge thing to a lot of players, and the whole situation just stinks of someone not having agency and not having any fun.
But a lot of players will be happy to risk their agency if they're in the right mindset. So it's all about, player buy-in, I feel.
Yeah, this definitely feels like the experimental end of role-playing, which I'm all for. But anyways.
I'd just say, I guess for me, it's don't make the decision lightly.
Yeah, one to think about. So, if you have any thoughts on this topic, if you've got some great examples that we missed, please let us know. You can find us on our Discord, links in the show notes. You can reach us on social media. You can send us a plain old email, party@theadventureparty.net. We're always happy to hear from our listeners and get some other ideas for topics about this or about anything else you care to mention. We are the Adventure Party. None of us, to the best of my knowledge, are actually sentient objects. But for now, this party's over. Thank you for listening to the Adventure Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.
I don't know, I've been told it can be a bit of a till sometimes. Well, that was one for after the show notes, so... Alright, stop recording now.